everybody. Welcome to this month's edition of the Female Film Critics Panel. And this is the show where I like to bring on my fellow content creators and my fellow female content creators, and we talk about our experiences, and it's so much fun and I love doing it. And today I have a very special group with me because they are two of the podcasters that inspired me to get into podcasting. These guests were two of the women that inspired me to get into podcasting. So I'm so excited to have them here. And we'd like to welcome Chelsea Robson is here.
Hey.
Yes, and Morgan Stradling is here.
Hello, hello.
Yes, thank you both so much for coming on and sharing your experiences. And I'd like to give you both a chance to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit how you got into podcasting. And why don't you start, Chelsea?
Oh, sure. My name is Chelsea Robson. I am a singer and a songwriter, and I am also a music enthusiast, I guess you would say. And I have been friends with Morgan since we were in about fourth grade, and we talk a lot about stuff, and we decided that we wanted to record it and like put it on this interweb thing about 10 years ago. And that's how I got into podcasting. So yeah.
And what about you, Morgan?
Yeah, I'm Morgan Stradling. When Chelsea says we talked about stuff, specifically, we talked about Disney movies. That was predominantly kind of the category that we like to talk about. And yeah, so one day we decided, hey, you know what? There's not a lot of podcasts, if any, that are talking about animation. There were a few Disney podcasts, and there were maybe a few animation podcasts, but they're more on the industry side. And so we said, hey, you know what? We want to do this from a fan perspective. So let's go ahead and do a podcast. And so we just, hooked up a microphone. Well, actually, no, we did not hook up a microphone. Our very first episode was just what I think a lot of people do is the microphone on your computer. You think it's good enough. You learn very quickly. It's not good enough. And then you just learn and go from there. So we have a podcast called the Animation Addicts podcast, where we talk about all things Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, and everything in between.
Yeah. So when did you start it about?
So we started February 2012.
Wow.
That's just celebrated our 10-year anniversary.
10 years. Yeah. So were you always a big animation fan or more sort of Disney fan, or was you always pretty passionate about animation?
I'd say being a 90s kid, at the height of the VHS era, definitely was a Disney fan, grew up always watching and rewatching all the Disney movies that I could, and some other animated ones here and there. Obviously, Disney is not the only thing, and that's why our podcast is called the Animation Addicts Podcast. But I feel specifically, things get out of vogue as people hit puberty and enter high school, and certain things that used to be cool, they really like to distance themselves. Like that's kid stuff. And I never felt that way about animation. I just felt that the stories and the medium which animation provides is so timeless and really unfair that it's classified as kid stuff. And so I just never grew out of it and continue to love animated movies to this day.
Yeah. Same
Yeah, that's the same. I just remember it was funny when we were deciding what exactly to make our podcast about. It's like there were so many other movies that we're just like, I don't want to just do the Disney films because then I wouldn't be able to talk about all of these movies that I really love too. So we both decided, okay, we have to zoom out in order to encompass all the things that we love. I mean, we end up focusing mostly on Disney stuff just because it is the king, but
it has the biggest canon.
Yes, it has the biggest canon. That mouse knows how to roll a tight ship, and it continues to create really great things. And so we that was we end up doing mostly Disney stuff, but we always take the liberty to talk about all things animation when it comes up as being like excellent.
So how did you end up getting Mason involved? How did that end up happening?
Yeah, so we had for about 5 years, the podcast, we had a co-host named Mason, and Mason was my friend who I had met a few years prior. And we just decided, hey, I want to do this podcast, but I definitely want a male voice on it. And so Mason is one of the funniest people that I know, has just such a memory for quotes and for a very, very much talented at, doing voices and just really, really sharp and quick on his feet and has great analysis and points. And so I said, we definitely have to bring Mason on board. And so that's how Mason was a part of the show for the first 5 years.
Well, it was nice to have the perspective of somebody interested in animation as his career.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's something that was different with him is
Mhm.
he at the time was studying animation and then moved into, working professionally and has gone to do different things in animation related area. And so, yes, we were fans, but then we also had someone who was living it and, trying to make a career in it.
Chelsea, what would you say is your favorite part of doing the podcast?
For me, honestly, my favorite part about doing the podcast is hanging out with Morgan. That's just been the main reason why I got started in the beginning and why I continue to do it, but also the people outside of that too. And like it's such a great way for me to expand in my own like professional relationships. So I can contact really anybody in the animation industry and say, hey, I want to talk to you and I have this outlet that allows me this excuse to get an hour of your time. So that's, I think, one of the biggest like cool things out of doing the podcast itself.
And what about you, Morgan? What's your favorite part?
Yeah, hanging out with Chelsea, I just love getting to do it. We don't get to hang out as much as anymore, even though we live pretty close. Always busy with kids and schedules and stuff like that. But I really like the opportunity just to deep dive into some of my favorite films. I'm such a buff for behind the scenes, director's commentary, art books, anything that allows me to see how this was produced. And so for the podcast, that gives us an opportunity to dive into those and to research those even more in preparation for the podcast and to share that with the audience.
Yeah, you all really introduced me to the whole world of art books. I didn't even know that was a thing until for a while you were doing the reviews on your channel. And I'm like, oh, those look really cool. Now I have like a ridiculous collection.
Right.
But they're really fun.
They are the ultimate coffee table book. They are beautiful.
Nice.
They're stunning. And people can't help but pick them up, as they're just hanging out waiting for, a party to get started or whatnot. It's, hey, I know this movie. And they start flipping through and they have no idea how it got to its end. A character went through 20 iterations until they found the perfect design, and then the clothes on top of that, and just all the world building. They're fantastic.
And Chelsea, you do all the editing for the podcast. How did you just kind of learn as you went? Did you have those skills going into it? How'd that end up happening?
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
So like I mentioned, I'm music is a big part of my background, and I went to school for recording engineering. And so I was very familiar with things like Pro Tools and audio editing softwares, digital audio workstations or DAWs. And so that's how it started, like for me doing it. I mean, at the beginning, we all kind of took turns because it also is very helpful for to be able to edit an episode. You're able to know more about what you should say or shouldn't say in the next episodes, and
your particular ticks.
Yeah.
If you're saying
when you're the one
all day long, it really becomes you become hypersensitive to it when you edit.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Because it helps. So in all, it does help to be able to do it. But yeah, I started doing most of it because of that. And with podcasting in general, it is a lot longer form. So there's not as much audio like tweaking or effects, but it is still like finding different ways to keep the time doing it to a minimum. Does take some effort of like streamlining your process. Yeah. So that did take on the job training. Yeah. I actually so we've done over 242 episodes. I'll be posting the 42nd one later today. And so each one has been anywhere between 30 minutes, and like the longest one was like 2 hours or something. And I did all the math for it once, and if you take all the time listening, editing, and posting, I have spent more than 3 months straight at my computer doing that work. And so it's just like, it takes a long time. So the time to streamline that becomes very important after a while.
Yeah, people have no idea. They think, oh, you're just sitting there talking. Like, that's not that hard. No, there's of course the editing process, but then things that people don't even think about, like making the thumbnail graphics and then the promotional and all of that stuff takes time.
It all adds up.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, it really does. Since you've been doing the podcast for 10 years, how do you think that animation has changed since you first started? What do you think, Morgan?
Wow. So in 2012, there were burgeoning studios that were coming up. Obviously, there was Disney, Pixar, but then other studios, Illumination Entertainment, started to get bigger. Sony Pictures Animation. There was a lot of studios getting in the animation game. I think we saw that in the 90s and a bit in the 2000s, but it just exploded in that middle part of the decade. And it just seems like there was an animated film coming out every other weekend. And it almost became too much, to be honest, especially as someone who covered it, because they weren't necessarily all high quality. Even though, we have great respect for everyone who was involved in all of those studios, sometimes the final products just were not something that I was particularly interested in. But again, I wasn't their target market, and that's totally understandable. Animation isn't necessarily just for kids, but there is some animation that is just for kids. And so, that's one thing that I've really noticed. But now, moving to the past few years, the popularization of streaming has a whole different outlet for animation. And I think it's a good and a bad thing, because sometimes I feel like there's even more animation there than there was even 5 years ago, which is kind of unthinkable. But because a lot of it is, or some of it is on streaming, it just has a lot more places to live. But for that reason, I do think that some really get forgotten because they kind of hang out on these streaming services. And sometimes I feel like the streaming services are always just promoting the next big thing. Like any movie studio, but it's just, some things feel like a flash in the pan, and then you never hear about it again, even though you can watch it in forever on there. So that's kind of just the change, just the rise of streaming.
Yeah, I think that that's huge, because I've said this many times, but there were years in the 80s where there wasn't a single mainstream animated film, not one.
Yeah.
And can you imagine that? Or if there was one, it was maybe literally one or two. And these days we're talking 50 mainstream that we're getting with streaming and everything, and not even including series and all this stuff. And I do think that can be a really positive thing, because there's such a platform for indie animation, smaller animation, for niche audiences, for adult animation, all that stuff you're getting to see real platforms for, which wouldn't have had before. But then also, I do agree that the animated films aren't as memorable, because partly by necessity, because like something, say in the 80s, like Oliver and Company, which is not that great of a film, but it was the only one that we had. And then, so it was great and we enjoyed it. And you just think about how important The Little Mermaid was to me as a child. It was the first movie I ever really fell in love with, and how I was able to kind of just be obsessed with it for a while. And of course, kids are still obsessed with Frozen and with even Encanto and things like that. But I just feel like 2 months later, the next big movie is coming. And so it's not the same kind of experience. It's just different.
Yeah. Technology has exploded, and it's made animation that much more accessible to smaller studios, big studios. And in the 80s, it was really, not to say animators aren't talented. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the tools of the computer has just made it so much more accessible to a bigger group of people, where you can have someone build the model and rig it, and then another person animates it, where before that was done by like one person. you rigged your character, you designed your character, and you animated the character, right? And you had to be incredibly talented, because if not, it looked really bad. You know, we think of some of these 80s TV shows or, you know, Saturday morning cartoons that it's just like, oh, we watched this. This is just so pathetic. And now technology kind of does some of that, you know, do in-betweens for you, and it will do some of the heavy lifting. Like, there's still really bad CGI animation out there. Whew.
Right.
Ratatouille, I'm looking at you. But it's just so much more, what am I trying to say? Just it's just so much better. I mean, even some of these small studios that are putting stuff out there, it's beautiful looking. It's very enjoyable to look at and to watch, even though I know that this was probably a smaller budget.
Right. Chelsea, what do you think about that, about how animation has changed?
So a couple of years ago, after we'd been doing the podcast for a couple of years, I was asked to speak at a forum similar to like a TED Talk type thing, but not for TED Talks. It was just for a local group. And I decided to do it based on, there was this meme that went around that said, on one side, it had a picture pointing to a person pointing to like a whole bunch of different studios, and like they're like a movie, and then the studio that they came from, and then like this person could name each one of them, and then the other side it just said a person that pointed to them all and just said Disney. And so it's like there's two types of animation fans out there. It's the one who knows all of the companies, and then the one who just thinks it's all Disney.
Right.
And what's funny about that meme today is like most of those, like a big chunk of those studios are now Disney. So it's, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, there's the one side of being able to, the streaming services opening it up to so many different smaller studios, which is amazing. But then also these studios being eventually bought out, and it's like, is that the goal for them to get it bought out? And just like, I don't know, but it's just interesting to see how that side of the industry has completely shifted. And I think there's always going to be a little bit of a balkanization, but then also a little bit of a centralization of different types of films. And animation has definitely, I mean, I guess you could say all film, a lot of movies based on the gatekeeping. They keep trying to close those gates again, because I think, like we were mentioning, there's, because of the technology being so readily available, the barrier to entry like dropped so significantly. And now because like all these companies are trying to buy up all of that real estate again, and it's just interesting to watch, I guess. I'm not here to say it's good or bad. In some ways, I think it's not so great, but in other ways, I can see the benefits for the consumer specifically when I say that. But at the same time, like I can just, as the fact that I did that whole talk, like an hour, or it was like 30 minutes. It was like a 30-minute talk on all of these different companies and like some of their history and some of their biggest films, to now it's just all Disney. And it kind of makes me sad inside.
Like Blue Sky and of course 20th Century and Fox and everything. I agree. We kind of get that same thing in the Hallmark world, because people will see a movie and if it's a Christmas rom-com, they think, oh, it's a Hallmark movie, but it might actually be for Lifetime. It might actually be for Netflix. It might actually, but they're just all kind of, it seems kind of like the Band-Aid effect, you know, that all the bandages are considered Band-Aid, but they're not, you know?
Right. Chapstick. Yeah.
Right. Chapstick. Yeah. But if you
name recognition over the for a product, rather than product first, then here are the brands.
Yeah. Your brand, the dilution. So if you were given the opportunity to start a podcast in a genre or medium other than animation, what would you do? What would you pick? What's like your next favorite type of movie? What do you think, Morgan?
Oh man. Okay. First thing that comes to mind, I guess, would be Zelda, like specifically only let's talk about Zelda, the Legend of Zelda video game series, which I'm not a super, I don't know, but that's another thing for another day, is like the level of fandoms. There's just someone who thinks they're a fan, but like, as you're not a super duper fan. There's the super fan, there's the engaged fan, right? You could like do them all. And like, I'm not a super duper fan where I have like Zelda paraphernalia on my wall, but like, I have all the Zelda books. I've played nearly all of the games. I listen to the soundtracks. I know the history. I know the studios, I know the creators. So it's okay. I say I'm a super fan. And so, yeah, if I did a podcast, that would give me even more street cred, because I'm a big fan, and they need to hurry up with Breath of the Wild too.
There you go. What about you, Chelsea? What would you do?
That's a really funny. It's like, so when people tend to tell, like for a long time, I didn't really tell that many people that we did this podcast, mostly because, as we mentioned before, people my age generally don't
get
see
it.
that.
They're
don't
like, oh, you're a weirdo because now you do this podcast about animation. I'm the same way. It's just like, okay, like I don't even want to open that can of worms.
Right. If you appreciate it, you will find us. So I don't see that as something I need to blast, as far as like my, general circle knows I do a podcast, but I don't expect them to listen to it at all. And then every once in a while, when I say that I do that, generally, and people sometimes like, oh, I like animation. And I just kind of like assume it's in the way that I like dolphins. Like, I think they're cute. They're fun to watch. I mean, yeah, they're fun. But I'm not a marine biologist. And so to be able to like have a podcast about another genre, I don't know if I have any in-depth knowledge enough to do that, other than, I mean, I do appreciate the rom-coms, and if I'm going to watch other types of genres, I generally go for the rom-com side. So we've got that in common.
Yeah. It's true that there is definitely a difference between the hardcore fan and the and just sort of the casual viewer. And you have to be kind of careful that, as a critic, that you are trying to be as objective as possible when you're going to, that you're not letting, especially when you've interviewed people like I have. That makes it tricky. I usually try to interview them before I've seen the film, because that would be awkward.
Yeah.
But yeah, you never want something like that to influence your review or your podcast, I guess, that you're doing. But so would you say that for you, a review is a review, or do you think that it matters that having female critics reviewing or having a female perspective on the podcast you think is important? What do you think, Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, just for in general, I'm not one to be like pro female, or like you need to have 50% of the critics be female, because I just don't think that way. I guess I think whoever's the best for the job will do it. And and that's like definitely talking about your later segment, unpopular opinion, but female voices are important, especially in this world. On the podcast, I felt that it was important. There just aren't a lot of female podcasters, and that wasn't even my consideration when I started it. Like, hey, there aren't any girls that are doing podcasts, like I should do a podcast. It was like, no, I want to do a podcast with my friend. And but it's actually funny you say that. We're talking about that because I specifically, when we started, needed a male perspective, wanted Mason, and sought that out.
Right.
I don't know if necessarily that's like an active thing the other way around. I don't, get upset about it or dwell on it. I just move on and live my life, and just keep doing what I'm doing. But there is something to be added.
Vocally, like as a person listening, it's best to have voices that have a different timbre and different levels. So it creates a spatial recognition. That is one problem between a podcast between Morgan and I, is a lot of people say that we sound similar, right. Which I don't hear, but
we don't hear,
that's because I hear myself. Right.
But if you're just a brand new person listening in, that can be a problem, because you haven't listened enough to distinguish immediately. Oh, that's Morgan's voice. That's the way she talks, her accent or whatever. And that's Chelsea.
Well, having somebody, I think we always, we tend to move toward people that we feel similar to in general. And so one, being able to, I think it's less about we need a female voice, and it's more about females need to feel like they are, need to have the confidence to actually just start. And that's been one of the main things that I've tried to push for, is for just like, look at you and look at, like, if you create the thing you want, and if you don't have that thing in your life, like that's kind of what Morgan and I did. We didn't have a podcast to listen to about animated films, and so we decided to create it. And it wasn't about like the gender thing, but I think in that, you're also going to be looking, if you're looking at excuse me, like like if a guy comes up there and he's kind of a bro and he gives his review of a rom-com, am I going to take that seriously based on what I would like? Probably not. So I'm probably going to look for a female voice that is like me, that is, somebody that has similar likes and dislikes, because then I will trust their voice more. But that's more because I trust them as an equal to me, not so much that it is like a hierarchy. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. And I can relate to that, because I've just been so grateful to both of you, because being on your podcast, getting to you a couple times, and I started, first one I was on was Secret Life of Pets. And it was just a really fun experience, because, Mason and I got to kind of talk out our different feelings on the Minions, and it just inspired
I was
me.
definitely, I was definitely on that, because I told my snake in the pantry story. So I was definitely on that.
Okay. Yeah. And it was so much fun, and it definitely inspired me to start sharing my own opinion and being confident in something that maybe people might be interested in and they might like. And so I started, because I had just been doing writing, which you guys were also really helpful with that as well. In not only in encouraging me on my writing, but also helping me to be able to cover festivals. And even just this month, I'm going to be covering South by Southwest, just because of Morgan and her help with that. And I'm just so grateful for all that you all have done for me. And I just want to say that.
Oh, well, that means a lot, because it's funny. We didn't go into this thinking, hey, we don't see any women, so let's do it. It was just like, I don't know. I'm very much a go-getter, and I'm like, you know what, let's do a podcast. Let's figure it out. Let's do it, whatever.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's had that effect is, means a lot. And you, Rachel, are top notch. Just, you're such a go-getter. You're so motivated. You're doing so many things, and you keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And that, like, even more so, like, I feel like I've kind of with the website and stuff, just different phases of life, I've really had to back away. And I'm like, oh man, I wish I could be like Rachel. She's just going all the time. Imagine if I had her energy.
Hear that. I mean, in fact, the only reason that I got approved for Rotten Tomatoes was because of my writing for Rotoscopers. That's where they found me.
You know what's crazy is they denied me and Chelsea after, because you got accepted. And so I was like, you know what? Yeah, I should do that too. Like, I've had over 200 reviews on the site, written, and podcasts, and even on the YouTube channel. And they denied me. And the reason they denied me is because it was like they were looking at my more recent work, which there wasn't as much stuff there.
Oh yeah.
So they weren't necessarily looking at the back catalog and giving that as much weight. And I was like, dang it. But if anyone can get, at least Rachel is there.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was particularly that whole Marvel series, the countdowns in general, that whole, for those years when we did all those countdowns. And I think that was particularly the reviews. And I am pretty proud of that whole series that we did. I would love to keep doing it, but we've kind of done it all. Like we've covered DreamWorks, we've covered Disney, we covered independent. We did a whole independent series that me and Kaja did, and I was really proud of that. And so it's just been a great experience. Well, we like to kind of end the podcast talking about our both unpopular opinions and then something that we're proud of. And for me, it's actually literally today I had an unpopular opinion as a recording, because I was not a big fan of the newest Pixar film Turning Red, and no spoilers, of course, but it has a very high score. Most people seem to really enjoy it, but I just didn't think that the metaphor really held up very well. It's supposed to be, I think, about the anxiety of puberty and everything else, but like there's this whole ritual and that she can choose to accept it or not accept it, and it's like that's not the way that puberty works. You don't have a choice. Like it just happens. And so I don't know, I just didn't love it. I didn't love the humor. It just wasn't for me. And it is challenging because it's actually the first Pixar movie that I will have gone outright negative on, which is hard. And I'm
Chelsea
like,
and I still need to watch it. We have our screener. We need to do that for the podcast next week.
And most people seem to be
interesting.
I just
I have not seen it yet, but just from the trailers and just the initial, I'm just not digging what this is all about.
Yeah.
So I was hoping. So
maybe if I was, a 13-year-old girl, I would super vibe with it, maybe, but I'm not. And so, it's tough. And people have such, and I have such a soft spot for Pixar. Literally, I have not given a rotten review to any Pixar film. Even Cars 2, I think, is so bonkers and ridiculous that I get some joy out of it. I gave it like a C+. And I mean, they have a Pope car. I mean, Catholicism exists. There is a Jesus car. Like what?
Yeah.
And that just entertains me for some reason. But I don't know. And so I was really struggling. But at the end of the day, you have to be real and you have to share your opinion. And that's what people are reading you for. If they're not reading you to hear what everyone else thinks, they care what, hopefully, what I think. But it can be tough. But what about you, Chelsea? What's your unpopular opinion?
Oh, that Rockadoodle is one of the most underappreciated films of all time. No,
I haven't seen it.
I mean, it's the one that most people make fun of me because I really like it, but I like it for multiple reasons. And a lot of it comes to the fact that like there's a yodeling chicken. Like, how do you not like that? But I mean, I think my real one that I would say is probably kind of what we've been talking about through this whole thing. And I guess Morgan was planning on doing that as well. So just as in the fact that like there seems to be a real narrative of deserving of like positions especially in the entertainment industry. And I don't think that I deserve anything other than what I can do myself and what other people are willing to trust me with. And so I think like there's a lot of people that are out there like picketing for jobs based solely on race, religion, gender, whatever. And I feel like it kind of goes back to a quote I heard recently from Tony Robbins that it's like he says that you don't fail because of lack of resources, but you failed because of lack of resourcefulness. And I think that anytime we kind of blame something in our lives or some aspect of who we are for the reason that we failed based on somebody else's opinion, yeah, sure, that can play a part, but in the end, like it doesn't help. And I think that a lot of that is probably one of my biggest like just unpopular opinions. People don't like it when I say it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's something something of value in looking at things from like what I would call a macro level of saying we're looking at the overall larger picture of there are not enough opportunities. There are not enough, we're not seeing enough voices being represented. That I think is a valuable discussion. But then when it becomes on a micro level of like, we are going to be really hard on this particular movie because it doesn't have enough representation, A, B, C, D, or this particular person or whatever. I think that that's when it's usually less helpful because not every movie can be everything to everyone. And so I think that having those larger discussions helpful than more, more
Yeah, I think those
focused
larger discussions
sometimes
are
aren't.
good. Yeah, I think those larger discussions are really good for helping to look at a market and
Mhm.
find a need so that you can therefore go
Yeah.
ahead and fill it. And but it's always based, from what I hear, it seems like everybody's always looking at, well, they need to fill that list. It's like, well, why don't you? Like, why don't I take the initiative and like stop complaining and decide what winning means for me? Okay, if winning means filling that gap,
Yeah.
then to go out and to play the game to win.
Because part of the problem in Hollywood, at least, is that people get used to working with their friends, which is
Right.
natural.
Mhm.
That's who you're going to want to work
Yeah.
with. So you do
So
have to kind of,
look
you
at Morgan
do,
and I.
yeah, you do
Exactly.
sometimes have to kind of push people to say, okay, look beyond that comfort circle, and for other people that are very talented that could add a different perspective and something new. So, we're going to hopefully push you little bit by little bit. And I think we have been, and I think we've seen it, that we're getting more interesting. I mean, we could have 2 female directed films, Oscar winners, female films in a row. So, I mean, I think there's been some, but I think it comes down to getting people to kind of get out of their comfort zone a little bit, but it just has to be done in a common sense way, I think. Do you agree, Morgan?
Yeah, absolutely. When I worked corporate America, they would always do these town halls and they would talk about, we need to hire, 30% women. We need 30% women engineers. And that's our goal. 30% women, 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 women. And me as a woman in the company was pretty offended by that, because not offended. I don't really get offended, but it was like, they were never, ever discussing that, hey, we want to hire the best. It was simply, we need to hire these women to fill a quota, and we're still not there. We got to get them in. Well, let's get those women in. And it was just like, okay, are we just going to pack a bunch of women who don't even meet the criteria, because then you can like check that off your box, off your list, and then off we go to something else. Like, I don't care about that. Like, me as a company, an employee and a shareholder in the company at the time, I more prefer that you hire the best person for the job, no matter, any of that. And so it was just like time and time again that they mentioned that. And it just, like, I think you can get so zoned in on this one thing without like taking a step back and being like, what's our end goal? If your end goal is just 30% women, fine. And that's very much how it came off.
Yeah.
They didn't care about the quality. They didn't care about the merits.
Yeah, well, and
so
I mean, it's hard because there's this huge group of all the same people that have the same qualifications, that are all the best. Like, I
Right.
mean, for the most part. And so you're having to find a way to kind of winnow it down. And sometimes it can just feel so lip service that you're not actually like doing things to make things better in a company or an organization to make things better for women. Do you provide, help with childcare? Do you help, I don't know, just a number of things like that. Like, do you make it better, or are you just saying what people want you to
as a
hear?
woman who, got my MBA, climbed the corporate ladder and specifically self-selected out so I could raise my children, like, that's not uncommon. That happens all the time. And to me, that's like a very natural part of society, is that women want to raise the family, or they typically do. No matter how much people want to try to change that, women are going to kind of fall back to those roles because that's what they like. And even me, like, I love working and my kids drive me crazy, but like, this is the most important thing that I can be doing right now. So like, for me, when I go to corporate America and I don't see that gender equality as far as 50-50 or even 30, whatever, I never was offended by that, because I understood like my girls, like, that's not everyone is that way. But there are a lot. And so that's kind of why the pool of women is smaller, there's a whole, I could totally go off on that another day, but yeah, I mean, I feel like for that reason, women make different choices that don't necessarily align with the career aspirations of men, or they do, but there's a 10-year break in the middle, which most likely is going to be what happens to me. Right.
Yeah.
And you're starting at a different place. Is that bad? No, but I'm now outside of the workforce for 10 years. Why on earth would I expect that I come back in and get the same pay level as someone who has been working, 20 years in the field instead of my 10 that I that I had up to that point,
Yeah, and that would be true support of women if we actually supported women in all of their choices. Whether someone chooses to not have children, someone chooses to, or is, single, is a working mother. That's when you would really truly be supporting women, is if we made accessibility for women in all of their choices.
Yep.
But what are you gonna say,
like,
Chelsea?
this is the only way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like looking at we three, like we are all have gone out and we decided that we wanted to do something, and we had, something in us gave us the confidence to go out and do it. And I think that that's probably the most important thing, is instead of focusing on, I think empowering and the giving confidence to women and to just individuals to start something is just the biggest thing. And instead of like, I don't know exactly how to say it, but I feel like we looking at in each three of us individually and collectively, like we all decided what we wanted to do and we did it. And that is enough to be excited about, and to be like, to cheer people on, to know where you are, where you want to go, and be able to have the, to not look at like trying to get a horizontal view or a horizontal acceptance of what do everybody else think I'm capable of doing. Instead, I'm just going to do it and figure out based on where I see myself and move forward with that. So I think that that's also a key thing to look in and to celebrate.
Morgan, what would be an unpopular opinion that you thought of?
That John Lasseter doesn't really, deserve all the hate that he gets from this point on. There's a lot of people after he was hired at Skydance that, actions have consequences. I can't believe they're doing this to their employees. And yes, actions do have consequences. And the consequence for John Lasseter is that he was removed from the company that he started, he founded, and was just directed, executive produced, was just so instrumental for so many years. Yes, his behavior obviously was not the best. And there were no, there were no civil, courts, and it didn't go that way, but that's not to say it didn't happen. However, I think that we know John Lasseter now, and I really believe in forgiveness and change. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't in society right now. That if you have one thing that you've done that's horrible, that's against what you're supposed to do, whether it's a small little thing or a big little thing, right? That you're to be shunned from society, and we are never to hear from you again. You're never to be able to do anything with your life. And I absolutely disagree with that. I think he very much paid the consequence. Like we said, he lost his job, lost a lot of power. Clearly, he was head of both studios, and now has had to go and do something different with his life. And why should he not be able to move forward? His passion is animation. He's an incredible storyteller. Why can he not go off to this new studio and go and do that, or form his own new studio? Obviously, I think the problems that he had at Pixar, one would hope would never happen again. And so let's let the man move on.
Yeah, I think
I don't feel like anyone really agrees with me on that.
It is definitely an unpopular opinion. I'll give you that. But I do think if there had been more problems, I definitely think we would have heard about it by now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that sometimes we, jump on those bandwagons, and we hopefully should, give people a chance to move on with their life and reform, especially if they paid their debt to society. Then that's what we ask.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's really dumb to punish a film for a producer.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, there's so many people involved with the writing and animation and voice acting and just a million things.
Or even people who go back and look at, the old like Toy Story films, like, oh, I can't watch it anymore.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
yeah, ridiculous.
okay, we need to separate the person, the creator, from the actual final piece of art.
I agree.
Which can be hard to do, but
yeah. Well, let's talk real quick about something that we're proud of that we have created. I always like kind of ending on that note. Um, and this can be a article, it could be a podcast episode, just something that you made that you think was pretty good. What do you think, Chelsea?
Can I say you?
Oh,
You
Can I
made
claim
Rachel.
that?
oh my gosh,
Like-
that's really sweet.
Like I look at those things and what I said earlier was like, it was completely true. I've seen so many people have come to us after doing the podcast for so long, saying that we inspired them to do something and we inspired them to create something, and on whatever level that happens to be. And I think that that's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of is being able to see kind of the ripple effects of just something that was, it really was just a fun thing. Like, it wasn't something that we had grand hopes of, like huge things in our lives. I mean, there's you hope for things, but you don't like think that I'm going to have, you know, I'm going to be a gazillionaire because I do a podcast about animated movies, you know?
Right.
Like, it's just not something I expect. But to be able to see the individual lives, like there's been people within the writing that haven't gone in and gotten jobs for in animated film, not just at animated companies. And there's been just a lot of people have come back and said, hey, I started this because you guys. And I get so much satisfaction out of that. So yeah, that I also am in the middle of finishing up an EP that I've done of different like love songs that I write. So I write songs for people who like are doing for their anniversaries, weddings, birthdays, things like that. And I interview the person and then I write a song about it and give it to them. And then at the end of a certain amount of time, then I put it all on Spotify. So I'm about to finish my first EP of doing this, and it'll be available in the next little bit. So that's also something I'm very proud of for as far as like my own singular creations.
That's great. Oh, well, you're very sweet. And that is a really great answer. I approve. So, Morgan, what about you? And you don't have to say me.
Mine is mine's really frivolous, but I watched all of the Swan Princess movies.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yes.
And I made a YouTube video about it. I'll put it in the chat so you can share it. But I thought that was a fantastic YouTube video that I made. And it still makes me laugh to this day. It's about 30 minutes long because I go through each movie. And I love it. I think it's great.
It was
That
great.
was a really good one. I really enjoyed it too. I'm like, what else can we make Morgan watch?
Right.
Terrible franchises. You do all the Ice Age movies or something like that.
Yep. If you want to torture me, yes.
I still remember the episode you guys did where you ended up reviewing Bambi instead of Ice Age 5, I think it was. And I think I said it at the time, but I wish there was that choice before every movie. Be like, do we want to watch this movie or watch Bambi instead?
That's awesome.
That would be a great choice. I'd choose it most times. Anyway, yeah. So one thing I thought of is we have this thing that we do at Hallmarkies called the Hallmarkies Podcast Awards. We do every year, and it's just our little thing that we do where we give like best Hallmark movie, best Christmas Hallmark movie, best. And I'm always just amazed at how much it means to these people that end up winning, because it's just like our little podcast awards.
Yeah.
But they work so hard making these movies, and they have to make them so fast, and they're really demanding, and they never get they usually only get flack, people saying they're terrible and whatever. And
right.
And so for somebody to be like, I not only enjoyed your film, but we've all voted and you win an award, and see how much it means to them makes me feel really good. And it was a lot of work because we had to coordinate all the acceptance speeches and all the presentations and everything. And then I had to edit it all together. Wow. It was a lot of work, but I was really proud of it. And I think it turned out great. Oh, wow. And so that's one recently.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. And I can totally see how they would just be so like tickled.
They love me. They really love me.
Right. I mean, these are not, I mean, people do end up posting stuff, but it's like, also, I mean, like on a macro point of view, I see that it's like you've created this like platform that, you know, you could take that and make it a bigger thing every year. And so now every Hallmark movie knows that you're going to be, you know, they're going to be up for your award, you know, and it's like, and to think that they will then like put that on some type of something somewhere, as far as like I have clout because Rachel
Yeah,
Wagner and the Hallmarkers
wild.
podcast said that I have clout. Like, I think that's cool.
The campaigning is going to get rough.
Right.
So there we go. That's what when I thought of. But thank you both so much for coming on and talking with me and coming on the panel. I really appreciate it. And I know people will be very interested in all the things that you had to say. And if you are listening and you haven't checked out Rotoscopers, definitely check it out. It's a great podcast. It's a lot of fun, and they have great nerdy couch discussions, and they're always honest and about their feelings. And so I really appreciate it. And check out the website as well. They have a lot of great, not just myself, but they have lots of great articles and interviews and fun stuff on the website. So where can people reach you, Chelsea, if they want to social media, all the fun stuff?
I'm mostly active on Instagram. I don't do a lot elsewhere. But check out Instagram,
Great.
Chelsea Robson.
Great. And Morgan?
I'm Morgan Stradling on Instagram, and I'm also on YouTube, Morgan Stradling. Previously, I've been teaching about how to start a YouTube channel, how to grow your business using YouTube. Might be switching it up a little bit in the future. So just follow me there for more fun updates in my life.
Yeah. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. And also make sure you're following the Hallmarkies podcast. You will really enjoy all the interviews and other content we have over there. And if you're listening on iTunes, please leave your 5-star reviews. We sure appreciate it. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. We also have the Patreon group and merch store where you can get hashtag Animation Junkie shirts. So take a look at that. And thanks so much to both of you. And we'll talk again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.